I always like to do this, and I do this particular topic in the education groups. I also do it as a treatment topic as well. When we talk about these things, we're really looking at medical aspects, the effects of certain drugs on the system. We're not talking about late-stage addiction. We're just talking about the effects in general. I always tell patients that if you want to get a little better idea of where we may have been or bullets we might have dodged, take the information that we're going to look at here over the next couple of hours and multiply it times 10, times 100, times 1,000, whatever our situation may be, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of some things that certainly could have happened. I like to do this particular topic in the treatment groups every once in a while because I think it's a great relapse prevention tool as well. Not only is it an informative topic, I hope, but I think it also, again, gives those of us that recovery is an issue the opportunity to see what still lies out there if we go back out. With that said, we're going to go ahead and get started with the first segment here. And again, like I said, I'm Dr. John McClanahan, and I am a grateful recovering alcoholic, so this has a lot of meaning and bearing in my own life as well, not just the folks that I have the privilege to work with. But I always want to start off the medical aspects piece talking about kind of the basic properties that all drugs of choice have, whether we're talking about alcohol, cocaine, pills, aspirin. All drugs of choice have three very basic properties. Alcohol has a fourth property that's a very unique thing that we'll take a look at here in a little bit. So again, like I said, I start off with these three basic properties. The first property that all drugs of choice have is they irritate what they come in contact with. Again, I ask people to go back and take a look at maybe the first time you took a drink, or even the first couple of sips in a series. Doesn't even have to be the first time you ever drank. But go back to that particular moment. And for most people, when you take that first swallow, it kind of burns on the way down. And the reason it does that is it's irritating the nerve endings in your throat, and then eventually in your esophagus and your food pipe, and then it hits the lining of your stomach. In fact, we have a great way to kind of romanticize this whole process. When the alcohol finally hits the lining of our stomach, and you hear people talk about, there's that blessed relief I was looking for. Actually, it's not a good thing. Again, we're irritating the nerve endings in your stomach lining. Years and years ago, I had a very unique opportunity, and I had to come up with some other ways to kind of present this information because I had a wide range of folks that I was working with. Back, probably 15, 20 years ago, I was the principal lecturer in substance abuse for the National Museum of Health and Medicine, and it was a job I really, really enjoyed doing. And I would do it in the morning, then had my duties at my hospital job in the evening. Well, I always did 2 lectures every day, and we had a morning lecture, like 9 o'clock, and we had an 11 o'clock. And it was such a unique opportunity because I might have, the 9 o'clock group might be 4th grade science students, and the 11 o'clock group might be 3rd year medical students. So I had a wide range of experience, understanding, that type of thing. But I had to come up with some ways to deal with some of these examples that the kids could kind of relate to. Unfortunately, the way things are today, I probably could use the same examples if I was doing this with a younger, 4th, 5th, 6th grade class maybe. Back in the day, if I asked a 4th grade class, go back to your first drinking experience, there wouldn't have been anybody in there that could say, oh yeah, I remember what that was like. Or if there had been, they probably wouldn't have said anything. Today, it would be a completely different situation. I have a friend that does adolescent work, and he talks all the time about every day the kids are getting younger and younger. It's not even adolescent work anymore. A lot of his kids that he sees are tweens. They're 11, 12 years old. I mean, it's devastating. But you have to come up with some different examples again back in the day. So I came up with an example a number of years ago that was really kind of an exciting thing. And I thought this might be able to be a way to get the kids to be able to relate to this. Instead of having them go back to their first drink or their first experience, I would ask them, go back to a time where you were on the playground or you were riding your bike or you were playing a sport and you fell and you hurt yourself. You skinned your elbow, skinned your knee, okay? I knew I'd hit on something because almost immediately I'd see some of the kids sitting in the audience starting to cringe a little bit. They knew what was coming next. And I'd say, now, here you're in that experience, you're in that situation, and maybe go to the school nurse, or go to grandma or somebody, and you go in and they look and say, oh, that elbow looks bad or that knee looks bad. We need to clean it up a little bit. And they take the rubbing alcohol, and I'd ask them, and what would happen then? And you see the kids start to cringe, and it would burn. It would hurt. And I'd say, okay, it's the same principle. Alcohol's irritating the nerve endings in our lining of our skin. Okay, same principle. Okay, it irritates what it comes in contact with. If we continue to pour a substance on nerve endings, and in this situation, talking about our nerve endings in our throat and that type of thing. The next property that all drugs of choice have, depending on the type of drug, if it's a sedative, if it's a depressant, alcohol, opiates, things of that nature, next thing it does is eventually it sedates what it comes in contact with. If it's a stimulant, we're talking about cocaine or amphetamines or something, a little different mechanism. The outcome and result's the same. Eventually, what a stimulant will do is it'll hyperstimulate what it comes in contact with. Okay? The end result, the mechanism, like I said, is a little different, but the end result is the same. I'd ask people, go back to that second swallow, that third swallow, maybe that fourth sip. Okay? All of a sudden, it doesn't burn quite so bad going down. And then you hear people start, relating to that in kind of a romantic way too, when people say, oh, that's smooth. It went from being a very painful, irritating situation to now it's not painful at all. It's very smooth. Okay? I would ask the kids the same thing. What happens if maybe grandma looks at that scrape and says, that looks a lot worse than I thought it was. We need to clean it off some more. And she puts some more rubbing alcohol on. What happens then? And very often the kids would say, well, it didn't burn quite so bad, except maybe a spot she missed the first time. It's starting to put to sleep the nerve endings that it's coming in contact with. So it irritates and then it sedates. If it's a stimulant, again, like cocaine and that type of drug, again, the mechanism's a little different. What happens here is it hyperstimulates. Okay? Basically, it's a sensory overload. I always tell folks, and I know you got better stuff to do than this, but you ever sit around and watch a light bulb and waiting for it to burn out? Okay? Or you go into a closet and you turn on a light and it burns out. You get that blast of light and then it goes dark. What's happening there is the filament is about to burn out. You get this overload of electricity. You get this sensory blast, and then it burns out. A lot of us have had this experience in another way as well. You're driving down the road at night, and all of a sudden one of your headlights gets brighter than the other. Well, you know what's starting to happen is that headlight's about to go out. It's about to burn out. It's being hyperstimulated. Either way, either mechanism, what you see start to happen here, if it sedates the nerve endings or the cells in general or hyperstimulates, the end result, if we keep doing it over and over and over again, eventually it's going to kill what it comes in contact with. The irritation, and this is kind of the catch-22 here, The irritation is the signal to the brain that says, this is painful, stop it. But very often before a person has a chance to react to that signal, it hurts, it irritates, stop, it puts to sleep or hyperstimulates what it's coming in contact with, so, it's okay now. As we continue to do this, eventually we start to kill the nerve endings, cells, and that type of thing. Okay? You're going to see that as we go through this in kind of an extended example here in one of the other segments. Alcohol has a very, very unique property that no other substance has, no other drug has. It's kind of a dual personality situation here. Alcohol certainly is a depressant. Okay, it's a sedative, okay? But it's also a food. In fact, it's a very rapid burn, high energy carbohydrate. Alcohol for years has been called the perfect food, and I'll show you why here in a second. So again, not only does it have these properties, it has this property as well. And this comes into play in a lot of other situations that we deal with in medical aspects and in addiction as well. Let me show you how normal food, and you probably are aware in some way or another of this. Let me show you how regular other food gets used by the body. Okay? Got an apple, okay? And I know from past experience, it tastes good, smells good, is good, okay? But in this form, it's absolutely useless. I can hold this apple until the cows come home and nothing's going to happen. Not through osmosis. I don't get the nutrients and the stuff I need by holding it. I have to break this down. And the process that we use to break down food is what digestion's all about. So it's a mechanical process. Now, because it's a mechanical process, it takes energy to get energy. But the body doesn't mind doing that because it's actually getting more in return than what it's paying out. Okay? I've got this apple. Okay? I want to start getting the nutrients out of it, so I start the process. You take a bite. You chew it up, and while it's in your mouth, it's getting mechanically ground down, and you've got saliva, you got spit and stuff going on in there to help break it down even more. So now, all of a sudden, in that one step, you've gone from something that's absolutely useless to something that still the body can't use, but it's in a more usable form. Now it looks like something that's the consistency of applesauce. But like I said, you still can't use it in that form. The process continues. You swallow it. It gets into your stomach. And the stomach acts like a kind of a food blend, like a processor, a big muscular bag that expands and contracts. And while it's doing that, it's breaking that applesauce consistency down. You're pouring hydrochloric acid in. You've got bile and a few other things going in to help break it down even more. It's still not in its usable form. Now, you've gone in two steps. It's taken some energy to do this. From this to something the consistency of applesauce to something that's the consistency of baby food, almost a puree. It's almost liquid. Okay? But your body still can't use that. So now it proceeds into your small intestine. And your small intestines they act like a sponge. If you look at microscopically, there's a retake, microscopically at the lining of your stomach, of your intestines, you basically have something that looks like a lot of little finger-like projections. In fact, they're called villi, and it comes from a Latin word that means finger-like projections. So you've got all these little sponges that absorb the moisture, the liquid, off of that puree baby food consistency apple. And when that comes into the bloodstream, all the nutrients and vitamins and minerals come with it. And then the solid that's left over eventually is passed out as waste. Okay? Takes a while for that process to happen. If I ate this apple right now, it would probably be about an hour before I'm getting any of the nutrients and the good stuff out of this apple take something to get something. Like I said, the body doesn't mind because it knows it's going to get something in return. It might be kind of a corny comparison, but I've always compared this little example to getting a paycheck. Unless you have a job where you get some type of prepayment or some type of grant, that type of thing, most people have to work 40 hours to get 40 hours worth of pay. You work 40 hours, you get paid on Friday, or you get paid at the end of you have to do something to get something. We don't have to like that. We don't have to, that's what we have, and that's what we have to deal with. So the way the body processes this apple is kind of like getting a paycheck on Friday. It's got to do something to get something. Okay? Alcohol, again, is been called the perfect food because it's in its pure, usable form. It doesn't have to break down. It's already where it needs to be. Okay? Now what happens, a person takes a drink, and because it's in its usable form already, it doesn't have to go through your stomach, your small intestine. Alcohol's absorbed right through the lining of your stomach. So it gets to where it needs to be within, a couple of seconds, minutes at the most, where the other process, the apple, takes about an hour. I used to always tell people, and this might sound kind of corny, but if alcohol didn't work that way, if somebody's had the day from hell and get home and that blessed relief, and if it had to be processed like other food, you take that first sip, sit there, and wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, and about an hour later, oh, there it is. It's already in its usable form, goes right into the bloodstream almost immediately. It's one of the reasons why alcohol has a few other properties or uses. A lot of cough medicines have alcohol in it, and it's used for a number of reasons. First of all, it's used as a vehicle. Alcohol is absorbed through the lining of your stomach, and when that comes into the bloodstream, all the medication that's actually in the cough syrup gets pulled in with it. So it gets to where it needs to be very quickly. Again, alcohol is a depressant, so it puts to sleep the part of the brain that controls your cough reflex. So it helps with that. Alcohol is also very highly absorbent of moisture, so it can be used as an expectorant. It pulls fluid out of your lungs and that type of thing, so you can get rid of that. So it's got a lot of functions there in terms of what it can provide. But I think the major benefit, if you will, is the fact that it is the perfect food and it's used as a vehicle. If you take a non-alcohol, like a children's cough medication, that type of thing, it works just as well. It just takes a little longer, because it has to go through the process just like that apple or a bologna sandwich. It gets absorbed through your small intestines, not through the lining of your stomach. So it's just as effective, it just works slower. So here we have this situation where, again, alcohol is considered the perfect food. I like to compare that to just like the paycheck with the apple. If you leave here in a little bit and you walk through the parking lot and you look down and there's a $100 bill laying in the parking lot, okay, all you have to do to make $100 is bend over and pick it up. I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. It doesn't take much to make something in return. With other food, the body has to give something to get something. With alcohol being in its perfect, usable form, the body doesn't have to spend a lot of energy to get a lot of energy. Again, it's a pure carbohydrate. It's a sugar-based or sugar derivative, which is another reason why people in recovery may notice that first couple weeks or months of their sobriety, if alcohol's in the mix or their drug of choice, we start eating candy like there's no tomorrow. We're looking for that replacement. Part of the brain is saying, certainly not going to pick up and drink, and the other part's going, where's that energy source? So candy and sugar kind of do the replacement. So again, we talk about these are the basic properties that all drugs of choice have. It irritates, it sedates or hyperstimulates, Eventually it kills what it comes in contact with, and then alcohol has that second little added piece where it's the perfect food. What we're going to do for the remainder of this segment, and it's a fairly short segment to do the setup for some of the other stuff, we're going to take a little trip, and we're going to go through various parts of the body and stages of the effects of alcohol in particular on these particular situations. Like I said earlier, we're not talking about late-stage addiction. We're talking about the effects of the drug on the body. If addiction is present, take those effects and multiply them times whatever our pattern might have been. Next thing I want to take a quick look at is, I want you to take a look at a group of normal cells, okay? Just a little cluster. It could be brain cells, could be stomach lining cells, could be heart muscle cells, could be liver cells for what we're going to look at here shortly, okay? Suppose you got a bunch of little guys here. Okay. These are normal, healthy cells, okay? And cells are made up, most of you probably know, of a lot of parts. Probably hundreds of pieces make up the cell. There's two pieces that we're going to focus on for our purposes here with this presentation. One is the cell wall, and the other is the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus of the cell is like the brain of the cell. It tells the cell what to do, when to do it, when to stop doing it. It tells the cell what kind of cell it is. All that's programmed into the DNA, and when cells reproduce and replicate and divide, all that information goes with the new cells. So a cell doesn't automatically or just, kind of rogue decides that I don't want to be a stomach lining cell anymore. I've always wanted to be a skin cell or want to be a brain cell. This is the mapping and the identity of the cell. It's very critical for what we're going to look at here in a few minutes. So again, we've got the cell wall, which basically holds it all together, and then the nucleus is what tells the cell how to function against the brain of the cell. When I was working with the younger kids sometimes, to give them another example they could relate to, because, nothing worse, and everybody in here has probably had this experience, nothing worse than getting to go on a field trip and you're out of school, and now you're going to have to learn something. And it's like, well, that's not fair. So I kind of keep it simple, keep it light, keep it kind of fun. And again, like I said, I've started to find out that a lot of the examples and pieces that I would use with the kids at the museum translated really well with the patients that I saw at the hospital. So some of this stuff kind of stayed around for a long time. I would ask the kids to give them a little more visual idea of what the nucleus is all about. I would ask them, I'd say, now the nucleus of the cell is kind of like your teacher. When he or she's in there, they're telling you what to do, when to do it, when to stop doing it. They're in control. Okay? What happens when your teacher leaves the room? And you'd see a couple of the kids would look back and forth at each other, and they didn't want to say anything because Miss Smith or Mr. Jones or whoever's sitting right there, and they wouldn't say. I said, "Oh, come on. What happens when the teacher leaves the room?" And they wouldn't say. Finally, the teacher would say, "Oh, come on, tell the man. Everybody knows." Well, the teacher would leave the room, and we're sitting quiet. And then we realize they're not back yet, and somebody would get up and start walking around. And then somebody might start laughing, somebody start talking, somebody might start throwing, showing my age here, throwing paper airplanes or, spitballs or something. I had a group years ago who scared me to death. It's like, I don't remember where they went to school, but kids say, she leaves the room, and after a while, people start throwing, chairs and desks out the window, and it's like, good God, I'm glad I never went to school there. And I said, so basically, when he or she leaves the room, the inmates are running the asylum. All the control is gone. Okay? What happens when she comes back? Oh, everything's fine. I grew up in the 50s and 60s and went to Catholic school, and were taught by nuns. And this was, again, back in the day where nuns still wore habits and that type of thing. We had a nun that I think she probably knew what was going on, but just wanted to let us think we were getting over on her. She would have to go down to the office to get something, and we always had a room monitor. It's always somebody that she would pick, and you're in charge while I'm gone. Well, you know how long that was going to last, and she'd get halfway down the hall. Now, this is back in the day when, again, the order that we had wore habits and also wore a set of rosary beads with a crucifix it was like a belt. They were huge, and they clacked. They made a lot of noise because they were wood, and they made a lot of noise when they walked. Well, we would use that as the signal. We'd hear that getting fainter and fainter and fainter, and the person that was supposed to be the room monitor would say, okay, she's gone. We'd get up, we'd do whatever it was we were going to do, and then a couple minutes later, hey, she's coming back, because hear clacking coming down. And she'd walk in the room, and we're all sitting there just as pious and as sweet as we could be, and all hell broke loose for a couple minutes while she was gone. Okay? That's basically what happens when the nucleus starts to get knocked offline. When it's not functioning the way it should, the way it could, okay, we start to see a whole lot of situations develop. The inmates are running the asylum. Okay? If you take a cell, just on a single cell, and take a look at the nucleus, and I know you probably know better than this, the kids used to get scared because they would ask about, are they really that big? And I was like, no, just use your imagination. Okay? Take a cell that the nucleus is starting to get knocked offline. It's not able to do some of the things it needs to do. Okay? One of the things that a nucleus has to know how to do, or how to tell its cell how to do, is basically it has to show it how to, and remind it to take out the trash. Okay? When we talk about taking out the trash, we have a name for it in medicine and in healthcare. It's called homeostasis. And homeostasis is basically balance. Okay? Everybody in here right now is homeostatic, and I hope you stay that way a long, long time. Every time you breathe in, you're breathing in oxygen. Every time you breathe out, you're exhaling carbon dioxide. Okay? So it's in with the good, out with the bad. That's homeostasis. That's balance. Okay? Every time your heart beats, that's homeostasis. Okay? Oxygenated blood is going to where it needs to be. Oxygen-depleted blood is coming back to be reoxygenated. Again, that's how you can tell when somebody cuts themselves where that blood is and bleed is coming from. If it's bright red, it's arterial blood because it's oxygenated. If it's kind of a dark brown, purplish color, like when you have a blood draw for lab work, that comes from your veins, and that's oxygen depleted, so it's very dark. Okay? That's homeostasis. Okay? In with the good, out with the bad. Okay? There's another form of homeostasis we'll take a look at here in the last segment of this, but we'll like I said, we'll leave that for then. So here we have one thing again. The cell has to know how to do. It has to know how to take out the trash. And I would ask the kids, what would happen if the cell forgot how to take out the trash? And some of them, they would look at me and I'd say, go back to your particular situation. Okay? Suppose one of your chores, one of your jobs is to take out the trash. What happens if you forget to do it? Or you choose to not do it? Okay? Or you forget how to do it? And of course, it'd always be one, well, I'd get in a lot of trouble. It's like, no. I mean, what would happen to the trash? Well, I guess it would just start to pile up and start to get really stinky and, take up a lot of space. And I guess if you never took the trash out again, there'd be so much trash it would force you out of the house. You wouldn't have anywhere to live. Okay? And I would tell them, keep that thought in mind, because that's what we're going to look at in the next segment, where what happens on a cellular basis when the body can't take out the trash. The first part of the cell that alcohol and all drugs of choice have an impact on is the nucleus. It starts to take that ability away. Now again, the difference in social recreational use is it falls asleep and wakes back up in a fairly short period of time. If addiction is present, we keep this process going. We sedate it and sedate it and sedate it, and eventually we kill enough cells that we start to have some organ damage, organ failure, and you'll see that in a later segment as well. So again, this first segment was to take a look at just the basic properties. Okay? All drugs of choice irritate, sedate, hyperstimulate, and eventually kill what it comes in contact with. In the next segment, we're going to take a look at what does this process look like as it's unfolding in particular organs in the body and that type of thing. So again, we'll come back in a few and do part 2 of this, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks.